Hello again, awesome Netrunner viewers. Today I have a strategy discussion video for you. This one will be all about currents. We will be talking about currents in general. We won't delve too specifically into any particular current. And we'll begin by talking about the history of currents in Android Netrunner, followed by talking about current events with currents, which currents are dominating the meta currently, why they are dominating the current, and how they have skewed the meta and forced deck building on the opposing side to change. Then we will then talk about what cards in the card pool synergize with currents, as well as how to counterplay against currents even if you don't have currents of your own. I think I'm using the word currents too many times in this slide. Are you confused yet? I hope not, because we are about to just begin. So, this is the history of currents. Currents were incepted into the game during the lunar cycle, which is the third cycle of the game. So, when rotation occurs and takes away the first two cycles, we won't lose any currents. Currents begin in a very humble place. In terms of power level, they were designed rather conservatively, which is rather natural for most new mechanics. The first currents, one for each faction, were all rather underpowered, or not so much underpowered, but more of situational in the sense that they work pretty well against certain matchups or certain situations while being completely useless in others. A rather good example is Cerebrostatic, which is rather effective against the likes of Kit, the likes of Noise especially. It was a very good noise counter back in the day, but did absolutely nothing against the likes of Valencia and Andromeda. As we moved into Order and Chaos and the Sand cycle, we receive currents that try to explore the space of currents a bit more, a bit of pushing of the power level. We see currents like Hacktivist Meeting becoming relatively strong, but nothing too mind-blowing. That is until Data and Destiny hit the shelves. There we found our first truly powerful current in the form of Employee Strike. Moving past that, we have Mumbat Cycle, which introduced pseudo-currents, currents that I don't really consider to be proper currents because they don't provide an ongoing advantage or disadvantage to either side. In fact, most decks that build around Close Not People and Freedom through Equality attempt to activate the current within the same turn as they are played by trying to score or steal an agenda on the same turn that is played, thereby not leaving the current in play, rather trying to get that one extra agenda point into their score area in the most efficient and reliable way possible. So this is why I don't really consider them as currents, and I won't be further elaborating on them for the rest of this video. We then move into the current cycle, Flashpoint, where the power level of currents was upped to a level we have never seen before, culminating in what some might say is one of the most oppressive cards in the game, Rumor Mill. And that's a very powerful current, but let's not forget Scarcity of Resources, which is rather strong as well. While it's not as game-changing as Rumor Mill, shall we say, it still is rather strong because it affects most runners and basically nullifies a lot of runner economy resources. And this is why Scarcity can be rather strong in certain matchups and useful in most matchups. But in terms of power level, it really cannot compare to E-Strike and Rumor Mill, making these two the two most prevalent currents in the current meta right now. So it's worth spending a bit of time to analyze why they're such strong currents. Employee Strike and Rumor Mill share one thing in common. They are effective in almost every matchup. Employee Strike shuts off a lot of corp IDs. This is because corps in general tend to deck build around their identities. Net damage decks, for example, will build in PU or PE, and Employee Strike just cuts off their legs at that point by removing a large source of net damage. Cerebral Imaging, for example, attempts to combo out with a large number of cards in hand, and Employee Strike just completely shuts that off and forces a current. If CI cannot react to the Employee Strike, they lose almost their entire hand, which is a huge loss. Same thing with Blue Sun. If they cannot get rid of the Employee Strike, they can never bounce their Oversight Curtain Walls back into the hand. That's 14 credits they're losing out on. That's a big deal. As such, Employee Strike is a very, very strong current that has potentially a huge swing in certain matchups, but is in general very useful. A lot of corp IDs, including the more vanilla IDs such as HB Engineering the Future, and Polana Foods are all affected by Employee Strike. So the fact that you can pack this card in your deck and make it useful regardless of who you get matched up against is a very strong impetus to include Employee Strike in your deck. And the same goes for Rumour Mill. Every single deck runs 3 Jackson Howards, because why wouldn't you? So this automatically makes Rumour Mill useful. Not to mention that it has an added bonus of completely shutting off certain win conditions, namely prison decks and glacier decks. Prison decks just simply cannot function without an active Museum of History, and because it's now unique, Rumour Mill turns it off. Without it, prison decks cannot recur some of the important tools and are not able to dilute the agenda density or R&D, which is a big deal. Glacier decks, on the other hand, can never score agendas without their defensive upgrades. The runner will simply play Rumour Mill and waltz through the remote every time they see an advanced agenda. So this is why Rumour Mill and Employee Strike are so strong. They blow out certain matchups, but are generally useful enough to see play in most matchups. So because of this, they become the 2 most prevalent currents in the game. What kind of effect does it have in terms of deck building? We must first note that both of these currents are on the runner side. The Corp doesn't have any similarly powered or any similar currents on the same power level. And this is actually quite a big deal because having strong currents in the runner side but not on the Corp side drastically affects the way Corps deck build when they ask themselves, do I play a current of my own or not? The presence of Rumour Mill and Employee Strike mean that there will be a rise in reactive or defensive currents. These currents on the Corp side serve as their main purpose to remove Rumour Mill or Employee Strike from the table. One example I can give you is a Corp that is someone who is deck building a Blue Sun deck. When you build a Blue Sun deck, you think to yourself, what if I meet against a runner that plays Employee Strike? That's a problem. I need to deal with that problem. How about I include a current of my own in my deck? Maybe Paywall Implementation, since it costs 0 and it's in faction. This way, Paywall Implementation becomes a reactive current, one that is included in your deck, not so much for the effect. You don't really play Paywall for the economy. It's a nice bonus tacked on to the current, but the main reason we have it in Blue Sun decks is to get rid of Employee Strike so that I can bounce my Curtain Wall for 14 credits. That is the main reason. So those are reactive currents. We also have effective currents, which are currents played for their effect. Such Corp-side currents will see a drop in use. For example, if you are going to play targeted marketing to counter Account Siphon, which is usually a good line of play. If you expect a Siphon deck, bringing out along targeted marketing could be a good deck building choice because then in non-Siphon matchups, your targeted marketing can be used on other cards like Self-Modifying Code or Parasite. However, if you anticipate that a lot of runners are going to be packing currents of their own, Employee Strikes and Rumour Mills, targeted marketing becomes less good. Because they will simply overwrite your targeted marketing and then play a Count Siphon. You won't gain the 10 credits, the Count Siphon goes through and you're sad. So what would you do as a Corp deck builder? You would just play Crisium Grid instead. It's one influence as well, but it is not nullified by Employee Strike or Rumour Mill. So I hope this has given you a new insight on how to view currents. They are not simply there for the effects that's printed on their card. They can be used in 2 different ways. Reactively, against your opponent's current, as well as effectively for the printed effect. And I argue that with the increased prevalence of strong runner currents, Corp currents are now better as reactive currents than effective currents, and correspondingly this is why we see a lot more currents on the Corp side being used for reactive purposes than for effective purposes. Now let's move on to cards in the card pool that synergize with currents. One of the most obvious ways in which you can make currents stronger is by recurring them. Since currents are rather fragile and can easily be removed from the board by stealing or scoring an agenda, or by playing a current on an opponent's current, recursion is all the more valuable in a deck that wants to build around a current. And this, I argue, is why what leads to the increased power in Employee Strike and Rumour Mill. as if they are not powerful currents in their own right. They are further empowered by the fact that recursion is easily available on the runner side. You can easily include 3 copies of Deja Vu and Same Old Thing in your deck, which can recur currents easily. And here's a bonus. Notice the colors of the cards. They are both neutral and anarch. What faction is Employee Strike and Rumor Mill in? Neutral and anarch. You have it. You can easily play all the recursion cards for 0 influence in the anarch faction. And this allows you to have a current of your choice on tap as long as you're playing Anarch. And this is one of the reasons why Anarch is so well positioned to play currents right now. Not just because of them having the strongest currents, but more because they have recursion to back it up as well, to keep it in play most of the game. Conversely, the co-op side also has recursion in the form of Archive Memories and Reclamation Order, but what we really want to look at here is cards like New Angeles Soul and the News Now Hour. Let's begin with the News Now Hour because it was printed first. It came out with the other first generation currents in the lunar cycle, and obviously it looked very weak, and I immediately dismissed this as binder fodder when it first came out. Now that runner currents are so powerful and prevalent, however, my outlook on the News Now Hour has certainly changed. While it still is a rather bad asset to include by most standards, if you can find a way to defend the News Now Hour, it actually becomes a really powerful way to support an effective corp current of your own. And this has seen play in prison IG decks. In IG decks, your biggest fear is Wizard, which with their 3 recurring credits can easily control your asset board state. However, in IG, you have an infection current that deals with Wizard. It's none other than Cerebrostatic. So, in an IG deck, if you want to keep Cerebrostatic in play, the best way to do it, one of the best ways to do it, is to spend the 3 influence on the News Now Hour and have it active with your Cerebrostatic, thereby forcing the runner to go through all the effort of paying a lot of money to trash your News Now Hour, take some net damage possibly, before they can even think of overwriting your Cerebrostatic. And then everything is put back in your deck with Museum of History and you do it again. So this is an example of how a recursion card, or rather a card that synergizes with a current, such as the News Now Hour, can give you the opportunity to play an effective current where otherwise playing Cerebrostatic would be a very bad idea, because Wizard decks very likely have currents of their own as well. So let's move on to New Angeles Soul, which I will talk in more detail. Of course, how can you expect me to go through an entire video on currents without talking about New Angeles Soul? So, one big question we have with New Angeles Soul is that while it is super effective at keeping currents in play, and is one of the few IDs in which you can deck build an effective current around, you have to ask yourself, is Soul better or worse position in the meta with such a strong prevalence of strong runner currents such as Employee Strike and Rumor Mill? Since we have already talked about the categorizing of currents as reactive and effective, I would like to break this down into those 2 categories and argue from there that Soul is generally weaker when runner currents are more prevalent. So when looking at Soul's currents, as reactive currents, which means playing Soul's currents to defend against Employee Strike or Rumor Mill, you realize that they are not that effective at being reactive, because Employee Strike and Rumor Mill don't really do much against Soul in the first place. The worst that you're going to get is that Rumor Mill shuts off Jackson, and Employee Strike means that there might be a window where there are no currents active and your News Hounds don't have end the run. But otherwise, as New Angeles Soul, you don't really care about Employee Strike or Rumor Mill's text, the text on Rumor Mill or Employee Strike. They don't really affect most New Angeles Soul's line of play. So, playing currents in New Angeles Soul as reactive currents isn't all that good. What if you play currents in New Angeles Soul as effective currents that are used for the effects, such as targeted marketing to constrain the runner's installs, or scarcity of resources, which hampers the runner's economy? Well, unfortunately, if runners are playing more currents, they will more easily be able to neuter the likes of Scarcity and Tama. Specifically, what most runners will attempt to do if there are currents in their deck is to draw for the current, and then on their turn, play their current click 1 to override Scarcity or Targeted Marketing, and then spend the rest of their turn installing the stuff they otherwise wouldn't have been able to install due to scarcity of Tama. So if you play targeted marketing for Siphon, for example, obviously, as mentioned in the earlier example, we simply play a current of our own and then go in for the Siphon, thereby disallowing Sol from gaining 10 credits. Same thing with scarcity. If you have a lot of resources, just play Rumor Mill on your first click, and then you are free to install all your Temujin contracts and all your daily casts. Problem solved. And as such, New Angela Sol isn't getting much mileage out of their currents, and as a result, gets weaker. So I argue that New Angela Sol is weaker when runner currents are more prevalent. Let's move on to current counterplay. Not all decks run currents, and some players don't have many data packs, so obviously not every deck can or needs to run currents, because there is an innate way of playing against currents. There's still counterplay available, it's just up to you to find it. Let's start on the co-op side. As the co-op, to get rid of a runner current, your alternative to playing a current of your own is to score agendas. This puts fast decks with fast advanced capabilities in a very favorable position. Fast advanced tricks such as Biotic Labor in particular are basically current deactivations on a stick. Whenever you need to get rid of a current in a pinch, just fast advance an agenda and you're good to go. This is a very common tactic in CTM decks. Tempo Tag, as they call it, doesn't like it when Employee Strike is played against them, thereby allowing the runner to trash sensies and pet campaigns without taking the CTM tag. Well, as CTM, all you need to do is to fast advance a breaking news from your hand to remove Employee Strike from the board, thereby resetting the runner's position. Shell game decks can also adjust their play to runner currents. A very good example is Personal Evolution, which really suffers from having Employee Strike active. One thing you can do as a Personal Evolution if you're suspecting Employee Strike from the opponent is to play shell games with your agendas and not score them. Leave them unadvanced on the table, just waiting for the runner to run into them. If they don't run into them and instead play the Employee Strike, you simply score your agenda the next turn, thereby turning off the current immediately and putting the runner in a very bad bind. Not only do they not have the current anymore, but now you gain the effect of the agenda you just got. If it's a House of Knives, the runner has to worry about net damage as well. So this is one of the good ways you can play around the corp, or rather the runner having a current on the board, and the corp, Personal Evolution, not having a current of their own. What about runners? Well, as runners, you have a bit less control over this because you can't manipulate agendas the same way as the corp does. Your condition is to steal agendas, and this cannot always be guaranteed. Sometimes it's down to access luck, but what you can do is to modify your play and play more aggressively. When there's a current active, simply run more often. Go for single accesses. If you can turn off the current, all the more power to you. At some personal anecdotes, at Nationals, when I was playing my Jammy HB deck, I was facing up against the guys, and I had a very early targeted marketing on Tech Trader, which seriously hampered my opponent's tempo. However, to protect my targeted marketing from being wiped out by a runner steal, I needed to resort to some subpar plays, such as putting a Turing on R&D, just so that my opponent couldn't get into R&D to nick agendas off the top. So this is how you have to adjust your play in order to make the most of your currents, and that's a very good example of how to do it. You must keep in mind that as the corp, the runner can easily run centrals, steal agendas to turn off your current, and you must be able to defend against that when you do go in to play your current. There's a very special case with runner play with currents, and that is when you're playing Wizard against Prison decks. As mentioned earlier, if as Wizard you're expecting Cerebrostatic from your opponent, you have to play in a different way. Instead of playing aggressively on centrals and stealing early agendas, what you should do is to actually allow the corp to accumulate agendas in HQ and archives while controlling their board state, making sure that they cannot recur cards, or basically making sure that they cannot put their agendas back to R&D. Sooner or later, the agendas will clump up in HQ and archives, and when they do eventually play their Cerebrostatic, you can easily turn it off by running set centrals to steal agendas and turn off Cerebrostatic. This is a very powerful line of play, But of course, a lot of people don't see it because, uh, frankly, a lot of people, myself included, don't really have experience playing against currents. But there's a lot of counterplay, a lot of nuances with currents that meets the eye. So it's always good to identify these lines of play and try to work towards that. Not all not all things in this game need to be solved by jamming in tech cards and solutions like currents of your own. You can easily play without your own currents, and just by relying on good counterplay, get the best out of your opponent. So I hope this has been a very informative guide and strategy discussion on currents. Hope you appreciated it, and let me know if you have any comments or suggestions about this. In the meantime, as usual, thanks for watching and happy night running. I'll see you around.